So, hello and welcome to another episode of Father and Joe. I'm Joe Rockey here with Father Boniface Hicks. And, Father, as you have come to know over the conversations we've had over the many years of recording, is that I try to make the faith my own by putting myself as if I were in the situation, whether it be talking about an episode from the Bible, an episode with one of the saints you've discussed. How would I address this situation? What should I learn if my answer was I wouldn't have done it the same way? And really try to take the context and the spirituality from lessons that the church provides, again, predominantly through the Gospels and the saints, and how to look and view it. 2 weeks ago, for those who are listening to this directly, was the Gospel of the Loaves and Fishes, where the giant crowd comes to see Jesus, and Jesus performs the miracle of feeding them all. As many people have taught me over the years, the precursor of the Eucharist, the abundance of God, the abundance of life that God will provide. And Jesus shows you the steps. You have pity upon those who need help. You bring God into the situation by performing the blessing, and then you trust in God. And that was kind of the way this was always taught to me. And that's great from the perspective of Jesus and how the story is written, obviously. But I have a tendency to put myself in other people who aren't exactly named or identified. And I was thinking, if I were there with my family, how would I react? And then it came to me, it's like, that's a deeper question, because it depends upon how aware I was of the situation. If I were towards the front and realized he only has a very limited supply, and I looked around behind me and saw effectively an amphitheater full of people, my amount that I would take and give to my family would be wildly different based upon my perspective. And that thought has basically just been gnawing at me ever since I had it. If I was up close to the action, right, by the stage, if you will, where I saw Jesus having this limited amount of food, I would be much more tentative in taking it, versus if I was in the back and have already seen everyone in front of me being fed, I'd be like, yeah, guys, eat as much as you want and be merry type thought. And that alone probably says something about me. But I also don't think I'm the only one who would have gone through that type of thought process and scenario. I mean, I've seen it at buffets before. I've seen this happen. So I wanted to bring this up, not necessarily action about the symbolism of how much you take, but what it means in terms of your relationship with God, because that's ultimately what it's about, is God openly giving himself to you, but those who are closest to it having a tendency to potentially be afraid. And that might actually go into the conversation we had in the last episode about the routine becoming routine. You are the closest to it as a parish priest. So these are the thoughts that came to me coming out of that gospel passage. And the other reason I choose this, most people know the gospel passage of the loaves and the fishes, so we don't need to recap it. But that's where I was at entering into this episode, and figured it'd be good to talk about it.
That's great. Yeah. And you said a number of things, and I might not track all of them, so feel free to circle back to some points if I don't touch on it. I like your concluding comment there. It's ultimately about the way that Jesus gives himself to us, and that miracle, of course, is symbolizing the Eucharist. It's a sign that will be fulfilled in the Eucharist. Of course, the Eucharist is not as interesting for the food content as it is for the grace content, as it were. And actually, the day of that gospel was I was in the parish that I'm assigned to now, and we ran low on hosts, and I ended up because it's a huge parish, and so we had like 1,000 people at the Sunday evening mass. And I looked at, anyway, I'm still learning what I have to double check. It's an interesting position as a parish priest. It's like, we have wonderful people who set everything up and prepare everything. And then what do I need to double check to make sure that things are, anyway, somebody put a lower amount of hosts out than, and I looked at the hosts once I had gotten the host from the tabernacle and looked at the crowd that had gathered, which is a little bit larger than normal, I think. And I was like, I don't know if this is going to fly. But I ended up catching it in time. I said to the other extraordinary ministers, or to the extraordinary ministers, the others giving communion, just pay attention, be a little careful once you start getting low. And then I ended up breaking hosts into 4. Those hosts are small enough as it is. And we just made it, left one host in the tabernacle at the end of a mass that we gave communion to, I don't know, 800 or 1,000 people. In any event, all of that is to say, and I said to the people afterward, some of you got less of a host, but no less of Jesus. And that's the amazing thing about the Eucharist, is that everybody gets the same, all of him. He doesn't give anything less than all of him to everyone who receives him. And the limitation is really not on what he gives, but on what we receive, on what we open our hearts, the capacity which we open our hearts to. And so that reception in the fulfillment of that multiplication of the loaves and the fishes, that we have at every Mass, is such a beautiful reality. But then, interesting, to think about how those loaves and fishes were passed, and how the multiplication took place miraculously across the 5,000 people, how that would be limited by someone who took too much, or if it weren't passed on somehow. Anyway, it's a little difficult to discern exactly what the operating principles are for that miracle. But we can imagine that, one takes more than another. People, as you said, the buffet phenomenon is that some people take a lot and some people take a little. And how does that affect the multiplication? Insofar as it harkens back to the Old Testament, in the multiplication of the manna, the principle was that everybody had enough to satisfy them. And so some took more than another, but there was always enough for everyone. And that miracle was every day for 40 years. That's really amazing. Now, the hitch was, if you tried to take some home with you, as it were, if you took more than you could eat, then that became wormy. You couldn't save it, except for the Sabbath, so that they weren't engaged in the work of gathering manna on the Sabbath. You could gather twice as much the day before, and then you'd have enough to last you for the Sabbath day as well. And so it's a really wild miracle that the Israelites experienced, and every day for 40 years, to the point that they got sick of it. There's even a description in the Book of Wisdom that it accommodated itself to each one's taste. In other words, the way that it tasted was what people would like. But still, they got tired of it. They wanted meat. So the texture, I suppose, would be different, because presumably it would have the same taste. If people craved a pheasant taste, then it would taste like pheasant to them. I don't know exactly how that works, but in any event, we can become so tired of the miracle. We can be so, even the most unbelievable thing can become routine for us. And you're right, as a priest celebrating Mass every day, I still have, thanks be to God, been able to celebrate Mass every day since I was ordained. And I have to renew the intention every day to be aware of the miracle that I'm celebrating. And I love the sign that's in a lot of sacristies. Priest of God, celebrate this Mass as if it were your first Mass and your last Mass and your only Mass. And to really take that kind of intentionality with the excitement of my first Mass, the savoring of my last Mass, and then as if it were my only Mass. So not presuming I've celebrated many or will celebrate any again, but to see everything anew and savor each moment. So yeah, those are some real challenges for us, some real opportunities for us, and then I think, as you said, I mean, being aware, if we're greedy, it's gonna fall short. God is gonna purify that, but at the same time, we shouldn't be afraid to have a bigger appetite than the next guy. God provides for each one uniquely according to our capacity and according to our tastes.
Well, the first thing I want to do is commend you for acknowledging that some people in your parish got a fraction of the size of the host that they would have gotten, because that's something that, you know, people, if it's not explicitly said, they wonder and they probably just get angry. Um, but actually addressing it and the meaningfulness of what you just experienced in the Eucharist is very powerful. And I think that that's, as you said there, even with one of the most epic miracles, and for that generation, having seen the series of the most epic miracles, because they saw all the plagues of Egypt, at least the elders did, going out of there. And the entire point of the 40 years in the desert was to get purified and to rely upon God. And effectively, you're hearing, we're getting sick of having to rely upon God, and all of the problems that happen with that. It's remarkable. And the other thing that I think is really powerful in what you said there is that it's our limiting forces that take us from expecting God and what we bring into it. Is that at every Eucharist, Jesus is giving everything of himself, his body, soul, and divinity. And the power of that is, well, what do you want to do with it? You gave the example from the Israelites trying to take too much. I think that the problem is probably more so the other side, is we're not trying to take enough of the spirituality, enough of letting Jesus into all of our situations and our worlds to make things happen. And I think that there is a really important lesson there. Like, you know, like I was saying in the beginning of the analogy, is for some reason I view the logistical way that would have happened, maybe because I've seen it portrayed this way, as like an amphitheater with a concert stage in the front. No one's really behind Jesus. No one's off to the side. They all kind of got like that pizza pie, almost like a baseball field angle at it. So if you're in the outfield, you can't see home plate as well as if you were the pitcher or if you were the catcher. You know, that's just general perspective of the field. And if you're close to it, you can have the feeling of there's thousands of people behind me, and I can see he's only got two fish there. I don't even care if it's the biggest fish from any story any fisherman's ever told, and it was, you know, yay big and bigger than a Buick or whatever. It's still two and thousands of people behind us. You know, count all the women and children, 10, 15,000 people behind us. That's a lot. And, you know, it's moving past me, you know, because I'm closest to it. I'm aware of the situation. I don't want to be the one who takes it all. But the reality is, at some point, someone does take more, and everyone behind them becomes more confident as it still gets to them and gets to them. And the only one who really suffered is the one who didn't open himself up and accept the invitation from God, which is what this is. And I think that that's the part that I take away, is I let too much of the quote unquote known facts of the situation deter from accepting fully what God has and what God's offering, and effectively making excuses and justifying why I'm doing that, which is all a problem and contrary to the missionary style that that we're called to do.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, it's our challenge, and I would say it's the exciting pathway ahead of us. Is how do I open my heart more to God? How do I place my life more at His service? How do I give Him permission to be more in my life? And what we see start to develop, although it's the way of the cross. Ultimately, it's a way of dying to self. It's a way of letting go of my own fears and preferences, my own agenda, my own self-referentiality, my lots of different things. We like to stay comfortable, and there's nothing fundamentally wrong with being comfortable, but it can prevent us from going out on the adventure that God has for us. Whereas when I give my yes, he's not going to ask more of me than I'm capable of. He knows who I am, but he wants me to live my story. And each of us is entrusted with a beautiful story, a different story. Each of us is made unique. And to really live my story in its fullness, regardless of the cost, then we see something beautiful open up. And that's, again, St. John Vianney, who we talked about in the last episode, he just was a parish priest who lived parish priesthood as fully as possible. And the Lord did amazing things with that. So really, if we give him permission, we'll watch him do amazing things in our lives. And that amazing stuff may be externally remarkable in a way that develops some notoriety, but it's going to be internally remarkable in our capacity to love. And like, what would it look like if you actually loved you all, you in particular, Joe, but everybody is listening. If you loved your wife, if you loved your husband perfectly, what would that look like? And then we can just think of a lot of imperfect love, which it's okay, and we don't have to beat ourselves up for that. But what if you actually loved perfectly? What if you loved your children perfectly? What would that be like? It would be amazing. And so, but that's a purification process. That's a giving Jesus permission to be more in our lives and to give us more. That's permission to stepping out on a limb at times and trying to do something in a new way. And whether it's moving from maintenance to mission in the parish realm, or whether it's just moving to a greater level of attentiveness and generosity in the family, or whatever. The Lord knows what it looks like. And the little things that hold us back, the little things that we just try to hold on to our own comforts or carve out our own space where we don't have to listen to anybody else or do hard things or whatever it is, just surrendering that to the Lord and giving him permission to work in those places can bring tremendous results.
I think that's a beautiful thing to take away from this is do that. do everything Father just said as your homework. You don't need me to repeat it. I'm not going to repeat it as well. And I do want to thank everyone out there for listening and being with us. I say this all the time, but our numbers keep growing and stabilizing. This is absolutely fantastic what you guys are doing out there for us and sharing it and spreading it. And we thank you all. And we will be with you again next week.